sorry, yeah. Um, I just want to maybe go back a bit to um see if we can like go back to the question of where Lacanianism fits in relation to Heideggerianism or just phenomenology in general, because um I believe it's on the Why Theory podcast, Todd McGowan's podcast. He argues that the Heidegger just doesn't have a concept of the subject, at least in the way he would like, the way he has one, or Lacan has one. So do you think that, and that for Todd is the distinction, like that's the fundamental distinction between um, Lacanianism and his tradition and Heideggerianism. And even Todd will even say that um, he believes that the fact that Heidegger didn't have a concept of the subject as some self-contradictory entity, that is what sort of led him towards Nazism, or at least um, blinded him from seeing the limitations of Nazism. But um, what I'm saying is that basically for him, and I think I'm in agreement, at least, that Heidegger doesn't really have a concept of the subject in the way Lacan has it. So do you agree with that? And also maybe for the folks at home, if they probably don't, or a lot of people probably aren't familiar with the Lacanian subject. So could you also maybe go into briefly discuss what the Lacanian subject is, and is it something like the ego, or stuff
Yeah.
like that?
So I would agree with you to the point that, like, up to the part where you were quoting Ryan Engley, which good podcast, by the way. I
Yeah.
really like their stuff. Yeah, Tom McGowan and Ryan Engley, Wine Theory. Um, I am uncertain about, like, the how to really deduce the fact or come to a conclusion that certain elements of Heidegger leads to Nazism.
Mm.
I'm not a Heidegger scholar. I'm definitely in the process of wanting to get more intimate with his work. I find some value, and I find actually a lot of value, and I think there's something that we could all learn as far as, like, the phenomenology of Dasein. However, in my knowledge, I couldn't, come to the conclusion that because he didn't have a theory of subjectivity in the way Lacan did, that's what ultimately led to his project leading towards his political views of, Nazism, fascism. However, yes, like, as far as his philosophical theory goes and his ontology, he definitely is not using subjectivity the way Lacan does. And during his time, like, nobody really had that subjectivity the way Lacan does. Freud obviously didn't have structural linguistics in his day like Lacan did, and he even notes that Freud was relying on other sciences like neurology, physiology, and just biology in general, trying to ground a materialist notion of consciousness through biological metaphors. And Heidegger was definitely critical of psychoanalysis in the Freudian sense back in his day because of using the terms like the ego. And it maybe could be the fact that these terms were already being used prior to Freud. You see it in philosophy, the Cartesian subject, and then like even Kant's synthetical one, right? Like, it's more of like a synthesis. But like, pretty much, like, it's a being that still, like, to Heidegger, it's like, what is the underlying being of this being, pretty much. And the fact that the cogito is just like this transcendental subject, right? It is presupposed by anything else, presupposed by being in the world. I think Descartes only allows it to be in the world, like, so far as it has extension, because there's like res quotidien and res extensia, if I'm not mistaken. But as far as Lacan's definition of the subject and how it differs from continental philosophy, it's not rooted in I think, therefore I am. Rather, he wants to have a reading of Freud, so he's going back to Freud and formulating the theory of desire. And that's one thing that Heidegger also didn't have. Not just the fact that he didn't have a theory of subjectivity because he just wants to stick to being and Dasein's like everyday projects, but desire, and then his later formulation of jouissance, this enjoyment, libidinal enjoyment. But this is what is the driving mechanism or the structuration of conscious or subjectivity for Lacan is desire. And desire isn't like a conscious desire, like, oh, like I desire to do this, like my conscious intention, like in like the liberal discourse, like as far as liberal philosophy goes, like the liberal enlightened subject is always rational, has like these moral agencies that are done out of a conscious will. It's like, no, the ego is actually displaced and decentered by desire. You'll later see that the desire is always the desire of the other, which, I mean, later on we can get into that if you have more questions. But pretty much not only is it that the subjectivity is structured by desire, but there is a split within, subjectivity, the ego and the unconscious. That's another thing. And I think you mentioned that too, like in your question, when you mentioned Ryan Ingley, the split subject.
Yeah, so you would just say that Heidegger doesn't have the concept of the split subject, and that would be, would you say that's like the fundamental, not necessarily incompatibility, but just disagreement or difference between Lacan and Heidegger?
Yeah, that, and the way that, not even just for Heidegger, but for how even all of philosophy up and just Western thought up until Heidegger, or up until Lacan, formulated subjectivity. And what's important about Lacan's development of the subject, and you see, like, not only like have I noticed this, but Michael Downs and the Theory podcast, Theory channel, they talked about how you have early Lacan, like prior to Seminar 1, but like his early essays, which he's dealing with his register of the imaginary. Then you have the middle Lacan and his emphasis on the symbolic, and then late Lacan in the real. But these three registers are talked about in the first seminar, but he's more elaborative on these other two of the symbolic and the real as the seminars go on. But what's important about understanding the development, or if we call it a development, you don't want to see it as an evolution, but rather that consciousness or subjectivity arises out of a misrecognition through the mirror stage. If everybody's familiar with that, the famous mirror stage, mirror face thing. And this is important to Lacan because we get this illusion of ourselves based upon the image of our bodies, but it's only like a fragmented image. And he compares this to how some animals are, in a sense, in the imaginary, but this infatuation with this image is usually used for like mating. Like certain female animals will do this like dance to incite them and create this seductive image, and it's for like sexual reproduction and mating. However, for subjectivity in human beings, the mirror stage is the seductiveness in which we are captivated by our own image. And then there is this desire to invest in this image, which is illusory. This image is fragmented. And then not only that, but once we are immersed in symbolic, which is language and speech, that situates how we order that image or desire that image. And this is what is kind of revolutionary about, if I call it revolutionary, this is what makes Lacan's theory of subjectivity just different from prior thinkers.
Right.
Is that it's this recognition.
Yeah.